if you have to get an all-on-4 procedure, if you see these pictures, which one would you pick, the FP1 or FP3?
All-on-X is a big investment, and wrong decisions can cost you thousands. Watch on as Thailand's top dentist unpacks the type of teeth you should choose. But before we get to that, there are 3 more things you should know.
Perfect, Jackie. How cost-effective is coming to Thailand for a dental treatment versus, their home countries?
An all-on-4 procedure in Australia, it would cost from between 20,000 Australian dollars up to 40,000 dollars or 50,000 Australian dollars. Or sometime in the US, it starts from 20 to 30,000 US dollars. But in Thailand, the cost of treatment would be half of that, generally speaking.
How many trips are needed to Thailand?
All-on-X, all-on-4 procedures for dental implant would be a little bit different. For example, we do a process called a 24-hour concept, which means that we insert a temporary next day. So for example, if the patient has surgery today, we can insert a temporary the next day. So that's our process here today. But if you're expecting a full mouth implant and then you don't want to rush the process, you want to enjoy Thailand, usually we completed the whole process in 4 to 5 days, which includes consultation and then rechecked. That's for the first trip. And then for the second trip, the patient, because we have to wait for the implants to heal, the gums to heal properly, because we don't want to rush things before we insert the finals, and the patient go back to their home country, Australia, America, 3 to 6 months, the patient will come back and then we're going to make another scans because the gum level will change, everything heals properly, and then it takes us a couple of days to make the zirconia, and then we just pop the zirconia teeth back in. And then usually for both of the process, you're going to be in Thailand for 7 to 8 days.
The first day that the patient comes to our practice, we're going to do some examination. We take an x-ray, we discuss with the patient what kind of things they like, and then what they are expecting once the case is finished. And then we're going to take a couple of scans in order to make preparations for the surgery. So the reason why we don't do the surgery right away, because 100% of the case for implant cases, we do a pre-planning. So we want to make sure that we put the implant in the right spot. That's very important. And then usually day 2, so it's the next day, we do the surgery. So let's say if the patient wants to complete one arch, let's say an upper jaw. So usually we do a surgery in the morning and then we place the temporary on the same day in the evening. So that's our workflow. But most of the patient, they want to come here and then relax a little bit. So if they're not rushing so much, usually what they do is we insert the teeth next day after right after the surgery. That's up to the patient's schedule as well. But this is just a temporary. We don't provide 24 hours permanent bridge or teeth or permanent solution because it's impossible. When I say it's impossible, it means by this, because a lot of cases, the patient, when they require to do an all-on-X procedures or all-on-4 procedures, they actually experience a lot of infections, a lot of bone loss, a lot of problems, which means that once we take all the teeth out, we place an implant, obviously with the process that we do, there are minimized, the amount of swelling, amount of the recovery time is very short anyway. But with the natural healing process, we cannot really speed that up, which means that there's probably going to be a little bit of inflammation here and there. Obviously, the gum is not settled. If we actually insert the final teeth right here, what's going to happen in the next couple of months is that the teeth's not going to fit perfectly. And then second thing is to do with, once the patient doesn't have a teeth for a very long time, at least if they have a try-in, they will know what they like. That's very important, right? It's like a try-in, they use it for a couple of months, they can give me more feedback. Obviously, the first day, they're very happy, but once they use it for a couple of months, they will have some feedback, like too long here, it's too short there, the color, it's too white, those kind of things. So we want to make sure that once we transition to the finals, the patient, we get it right. So that's why what we do is after we insert the temporaries, the patient will use that for, let's say, 3 to 6 months. The patient will come back, and then we're going to transition to the finals. So with the finals, usually what we do, it takes 4 days. So the first day the patient come back, we discuss, about the patient feedback, and then we do a couple of scans. And then usually for the zirconia bridge, because it's harder to make, so it takes pretty much 2 full days to complete. So what we do is by day 4, we're going to insert the final. So that's what we do usually. And also the reason why we do this, and when most of the patients will say, oh, I have to travel there 2 times and then it's not worth it. But some of the clinics provide them one-time solution. But as I mentioned, with the natural healing process, we cannot speed that up. That's very straightforward because we want to make sure that it's a long-lasting solution. So if you look at our warranty, we provide lifetime warranties on the implants and also lifetime warranties on the bridge, on the zirconia bridge, which means that I'm pretty certain that in Thailand, we are the only clinics that are able to do that. But as I mentioned, we have to get things right. That's very important. So I would like to compare between FP1 and FP3 bridge. I think a lot of patients has a lot of questions based on this. And I'm going to explain what kind of process that we do here. So in your personal opinion, if you have to get an all-on-4 procedure, if you see these pictures, which one would you pick, the FP1 or FP3? And just imagine that having this new mouth. So most of the patient, when they see FP1, the reason why they choose it because it's more natural. With FP3, the problem is, as you can see, there are fake gum line here, and usually speaking, the bridge is thicker. So from appearance-wise, if we get it right with the FP1, from the patient perspective, obviously for the dentist, we can tell that it's an all-on-X case. But from patient perspective, they cannot tell whether it's an implant or a veneers or a crown. So that's what we're trying to achieve. Second thing with the benefit of FP1 is we're able to minimize the amount of bone reductions. That's very important because with FP3, we have to do a lot of cutting gums, cutting bones, because we need to provide some space for the fake gum. So this is the conventional methods. I'm not saying this is the wrong methods, but it's the approach that we've been doing this for the past 20 years. But FP1 is a new approach that we do because with the CAD/CAM technology, we're able to do this right now. So with the FP1, the benefit of it, first thing is natural. Second thing is we don't have to do a lot of bone reduction, which means faster recovery. And then thirdly, because the bridge is much thinner, which means that the cleanability and then also in terms of the long-term maintenance, it's much better. So all of our cases, no matter whether it's 3-on-6 or all-on-4 procedure, because most of the patient comes to me, they say they want 3-on-6 because they want FP1. But I tell them that you can get an all-on-4 with FP1 as well. So which means that with the bridge, FP1 provides superior in terms of aesthetics, natural, and in terms of the long-term maintenance. So you can see here, this is an example of another patients that we do. So you can see we're able to provide a very natural looking bridge, and then also at the same time the recovery is very fast. Probably a lot of patients, when they see on the internet of getting on X done, they probably see like bruises here and there. You look like a panda, because of the surgery. The reason why that happened is most of the time is to do with a lot of bone reductions. So with FP1, we try to avoid that. So the way we do is after we remove the teeth, we only actually cut a little bit of the bone where the bone is charred. We just actually grind that down just a tiny bit. Just want to make sure it doesn't actually push against the gum. That's all we do. And then we place an implant, and we put an implant right away. And most of the time, the patient don't have any bruises. They recover within a day. Some of the patient don't feel any pain after the surgery with the medication. That's why we're able to insert the teeth the next day. It's not just to do with the CAD/CAM as well. It's to do with the surgery. So if we do things conventionally, like a lot of bone graft, it's impossible to put the teeth in because in terms of the swollenness, it's just too much. You cannot push the teeth in. So in terms of the FP1, the difficult part starts from the surgery. So if you don't do things right from the first place, it's impossible to get the FP1 right. So I have a little bit about summaries. You can see with the design, the FP1 looks more natural. Amount of bone reduction is very minimal. In terms of aesthetics, more natural. So you can see we try to mimic the nature as much as possible. Cleaning, better hygiene, which means that with the FP3, the problem is the patient have to, let's say a lot of patients are very concerned about long-term maintenance. Once they get it done, and then, they are not very, let's say the cost of cleaning is very high in a lot of countries. So with FP3, what we have to do with conventional process, we have to take it out and then clean it. The cost is high, and then also in terms of smells, it's really bad. But with FP1, because we make things very natural, less bulky, which means that generally speaking, if the patient do 3 things correctly, they don't really have to take it out and clean it. So first thing first, they use water pick, water spray machine. Second thing is brushing. against the teeth and the gum, and then thirdly, mouthwash. And then usually what we do with the FP1 is you can do a regular cleaning. You don't have to see this implant specialist. So that's very important in terms of the long-term maintenance. But with FP3, you really need to see the specialist because otherwise they can't take it out. And the comfort, you can see it's lighter, more natural. This is very important. Usually with FP3, it's very heavy and it affects the speech. Even though FP1, even though we do it right, the patient will still have a little bit of adjustment in terms of speech. But FP3, it's pretty much impossible. Like, it's very difficult for the patient to adjust. Because I have a lot of patients who are, let's say, a singer, a speaker, those kind of patients, they're very concerning about pronunciation, very concerned about how they sound. So that's very important. So we develop our techniques with our team to be able to, so I would say all of our cases we do with FP1, not FP3. I'll start in terms of the procedure so you have a better idea of what we do, the real case. So the patient come in and then you have a lot of problems, teeth fractures, infection here and there. So we decided to go with all on 4 procedures. So the first step of treatment is we actually start with the scanning. So it's the first visit. So you can see that in this case we scan because we would like to convert the patient information into a 3D information first. And then once we do that, what we do is we do what we call a surgical guide planning. So we want to make sure that we put an implant in the right spot, and then we try to minimize amount of cutting. So with the conventional methods, when we place an implant, we do it freehand. So that's what I did in my specialty program, right? But with today's process, what we do is once we actually pre-plan the implant positions in the computer, we actually can print out this template. You can see there's little holes here. So once we insert an implant, this acts as like a jig pretty much. So we insert an implant through a hole that we actually plan. So which means that with the conventional process, when I say freehand, it means like it's manually done, which means that I have to cut things open, look at the bone, and then I try to get things right manually. I mean, even though with experienced dentists, I would say it's predictable to a certain point, but it's not as repeatable as a surgical guide. That's very important, right? Because human error, it happens to even with experienced dentists, right? So we try to minimize that. So with the surgical guide, we, try to minimize amount of human errors as much as possible. And then what we do is we do what we call a smile design before we start the process, because we want to make sure that we get the right size and then make sure it matches the patient profile. Here's design of prosthesis. So this is an example of the CAD CAM. So CAD stands for computer aided design. So we designed that in the computer. So what we do is after we place an implant, as I mentioned, we don't take any impressions, so we scan. So this is the scan file that we use. So here you can see photos, and then you can see this clearly. This is right after the surgery. So there's not a lot of bleeding, and then also amount of wound cutting is very minimal. So that's why the patient recovered really fast. So you can see in this picture, this is 1 day after the surgery. No bruises, no swelling. So this is what we do, the first set of temporary. And then the patient is very happy with the temporary. So this is a temporary, and this is the finals. So we copy the design. We have all the information needed. We have a lot of patients. So what we do is once the patient came to our clinics, we take a lot of photos. We want to make sure we get things right. And then this patient really liked the temps. So what we do is we just scan it, and then we copy, and then we print it. We mill it. So which means that we can copy exactly the same design, all right? But most importantly, when we look at these pictures, you're not going to see the gum line, right? Look nice. You're not going to see any gaps. So here you can see that what you really need to see is the pictures inside the mouth. Because sometimes with FP3, the outside part looks really nice, but the internal part, there's a bridge, there's a gap, and also there's really thick gum, fake gum here, there. But you can see here, this is the patient, natural gum line. This is the patient, all right? So this is what we do.
A lot of our customers have this concern or query that, once the dental treatment is done here and they go back to their home country and something happens, what is the procedure? How do they take care of it?
All right, so first of all, I'll give you an example. So a procedure like an all-on-X procedure, obviously post-operative care, it is post-op instruction, it is very important. So first of all, most of the time when there's a problem, it's more to do with post-operative care or post-op instruction. So first of all, you have to follow that post-op instruction carefully first. Second of all, if something happens, most of the clinic here should provide you with a warranty. What I can see as a red flag in terms of they don't provide you a warranty at all, so that would be a red flag, right? So because if something happened and then you come back and you want to get it fixed, they don't do that, I don't think it's a good choice. So I think second thing, you have to look up for a warranty. So, but I think the best option is you have to take care of yourself really well, and then you look at the warranty. And then if everything is under cover, I think coming back to your clinics is the best option to fix in terms of the cost, even though with the ticket itself, it's still cheaper than going to a regular clinic in the US. Because I have an incident where just, let's say the patient can come back in a year or two, but he was on the temporary for quite a while. But in terms of that, he's supposed to come back at 6 months and then it breaks. He just go for a checkup, nothing wrong, just slightly of the teeth breaks. I mean, the temporary breaks, they charge $1,000 for that, just for checkup and x-ray. So I think the best way is please follow the instruction carefully. If we say, okay, the temporary is supposed to use for 6 months, please come back at 6 months.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, to prevent any kind of complication, post-complication, yeah.
Get a great smile with DentaVacation. Visit a hand-picked dental clinic today.